My name is Pam Quackenbush, and I work at the Township Public Library, and I do a lot of the seed and plant and garden programming here. And my co-host is Jocelyn. She's our youth librarian, but she's agreed to be my right-hand woman here tonight. So we're going to get going. My program tonight is getting started with starting seeds. I've been doing this program for years in person at the library. This is my first time doing it virtually. So I kind of had to switch things up a little bit, put some more slides in, things that I normally would be demonstrating in person. And so I hope you enjoy it. So the little bit of an introduction. This is the first book on seed starting I bought. I bought it in 1976, which is about 100 years ago, for those who are younger. It's called Water, Light, and Love, and it still kind of holds true today. Those are the basic necessities for starting seeds. Everybody makes mistakes, everybody has challenges, but you know, if you are determined and love your plants, then you're going to probably get through it okay. If not, you'll learn something. What is a seed? It's a complete living plant in an embryonic state. Everything that plant requires to grow for the first week or two is inside that seed. There's a set of leaves, there's a stem, and there's a root. And there's a built-in food supply that nourishes the plant right in the very beginning. Seeds are alive, and even when they're dormant, they're still alive. There's still metabolic activity, and they react to their environment. They react to moisture, they may react to temperature, and they react to light. We have somebody say they're not able to hear. I hope.
Okay, Rhonda, try,
Okay.
Let's see. You can try to go out and come back in and see if that takes care of it. The other thing would be to down by the mute. If you click the little up caret, you can click on audio settings. You can also choose a different speaker, and you can test your speaker and microphone.
And I find sometimes that it helps to put on earphones if you're having trouble hearing through the regular, hence the earphones. So your seeds, and that's why when you keep them dormant and when you're storing your seeds, you want to keep them cool, you want to keep them dry, and you want to keep them dark, because any of those moisture, temperature, and light signal the seed that it's time to wake up and start doing their thing. We grow plants from seeds for lots of reasons. Plant geeks like me, we do it for fun, but you can do it to save money. If you go to the nursery and you buy a 4-pack of tomato plants, you might spend anywhere from $2 to $5, $6 for that. If you buy a packet of tomato seeds, you could probably start 40 plants for a couple of dollars. So it makes sense especially if you like to plant a lot of something, to start your plants from seeds. The other thing is that seeds can be saved from year to year. They have different viabilities, but some seeds are good for 3, 4, 5 years. So you can save, nobody usually needs to plant the whole packet, but you can save them and keep them and from year to year and still grow them. You get a much bigger selection of varieties typically when you go to a nursery. And I'm not knocking nurseries. I love going to nurseries, but they often don't have the varieties that I've come to know and love. And so the only way I can get them is to grow them myself from seeds. And with seeds, you get an infinite number of varieties that you can grow. You may only see 4 or 5, maybe even 2 eggplants at your nursery, whereas you know, there's 50 different ones probably that you can find, even or more, you know, looking at various seed catalogs. You can have your plants when you need them. I always found that things I wanted to get going early, like broccoli and cauliflower, some nurseries don't even put them out till the end of May, and I want them in April. So that's part of, you know, having things when you need them. Again, when I go to plant my fall garden, you don't find the seedlings you need in nurseries typically in August and September. So you have to kind of think ahead and start them yourself. You have control over the soil, the chemicals. You know, you can avoid treated seed. If you grow organically, that's really important. Not all, very few nurseries are completely organic. You can use recycled material. You're not walking away from a nursery with a brand new flat full of, you know, dirt and plants. You're using the same ones year after year. And personal satisfaction, which is, you know, it's great. That's I just really enjoy starting seeds, and I do get a lot of satisfaction from it. And I know a lot of other people do too. Lots of places to find seeds. You can find them on retail racks at the store. There's seed catalogs. And once you start requesting seed catalogs, you'll get quite a few every spring. There's seed libraries. Lyon Township Public Library has a seed library, and I'll go more into that toward the end of the program. There's seed swaps and trading site. There's trading sites online where you can swap or trade seeds. There's physical seed swaps, of course, not this last year, but going forward, we're hoping to see those, you know, in the coming years, where basically people get together and swap seeds, and it can be a neighborhood seed swap, or it can be a regional seed swap. There's a big one in Michigan every spring in up by Midland, and people come from all over the state and even out of state to go to that one. So that's a big one. You can save your own seeds from year to year, which I'm a big proponent of. And you can gather seeds in the wild. That's typically more for flowers and wildflowers and things like that, but definitely it's an option. We're not going to dwell a lot on this today, but just to kind of familiarize, I can't say it, to get you familiar with different types of seeds. There's open pollinated seeds, which means the pollen is transferred by insects, winds, birds. Nothing is required from you unless you want to keep the varieties pure, but that's another whole program. Heirloom seeds are open pollinated varieties that have been kept from generations. Sometimes it's families, sometimes farmers keep the seeds over years, and ethnic groups, and also, and beyond that, just geographic isolation has forced many people around the world to share their own, or to save their own seeds. And over the years, they become an heirloom because they've been doing it for so long. These are people that were isolated, couldn't get out, you know, they don't have a Walmart or a, you know, some type of a Lowe's down the street where they can go buy seeds. You know, they have to save them or they won't have them. Now, organic, most people are familiar with that. The parent plant that created the seed is grown without herbicides, pesticides, or fertilizers. And then that means there's a lot of people that feel that carries through the seed, that memory of being organic, and some people will not grow with anything but organic seed. I'm a little bit more, I guess, pragmatic about it, because you can't always get organic seeds. And I think it's more important how you grow the plant. And if you grow the plant and save your seed from year to year, then you've got the same results. You can heal a seed that's been over chemicalized, I guess you could say. Hybrid seeds are seeds that are an intentional controlled cross. You'll see a lot of hybrids available now. they were usually originally started to increase production or uniformity for farmers that need to grow, where they want all the tomatoes to look exactly the same and be the same size so they fit in the shipping containers. That kind of uniformity isn't really required by home gardeners. And so that's why we have a lot more options. We can go with heirloom plants that have been grown for years. And, you know, and some people really like hybrids, and I'm not dissing them because there's some hybrids that are very beloved. One of them is Sun Gold cherry tomatoes. That's probably the favorite cherry tomato out there, and it's a hybrid. People have tried to dehybridize it, make it, you know, come up with open pollinated types that aren't, that they can save seed from. And some have been highly successful. There's some really nice cherry tomatoes out there that are not hybrids. The problem with, if you save seed, the hybrids may or may not look much like their parent plant because it's a cross and it's going to have genetic material from both parents. But if you like hybrids, by all means, don't, I mean, I'm not trying to, I never want to have people feel like it's inferior to grow a hybrid, because a lot of people feel they are superior. And for the purposes of this program, it doesn't really matter. We're just starting seeds. The last term you might hear is genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. These were actually laboratory created varieties where they've introduced genes, taken away genes. A lot of them are meant to be used with chemicals like Roundup and be resistant to it. Very few, if a lot of people want to avoid GMOs, and very few garden plants are genetically modified. It's pretty, at this point, it's pretty much restricted to corn, soybeans, sugar beets, some basic, real, you know, factory farm items. Most of the I can't even think, unless you got a hold of some of that seed, you're not going to be growing GMO seed in your garden. This is a little bit more on pollination. The little illustrations, the cross-pollination is where pollen has to move from one plant to the other. You know, either has to go to the stigma, one has a stigma and one has the anther, and the pollen has to move back and forth or they won't produce seed. The other type is self-pollinating plants. They have, everything is self-contained in that flower to pollinate itself. So it's important to know, to a certain extent, what kind of plants you're growing. Like, for instance, tomatoes are a self-pollinating plant. That doesn't mean they can't be pollinated by a bee that visits from another, that when it visited another plant just before. But basically, they can pollinate themselves. But if you want to grow tomatillos, which are a relative of tomatoes, they have to be cross-pollinated. You have to have more than one plant to have a success in getting fruit from that plant. So that's a basic, you know, if you're not into seed saving, those are the basic reasons why you need to know what it is. But a lot of our garden plants don't require that. Very few do, actually. I want to make a little bit of a case for heirlooms. A lot of heirloom, probably 90% of heirloom varieties have already become extinct. That's happened because of people stopping saving their own seeds and starting to buy them. Large companies have bought up most of the small seed growers, and they retire the open pollinated inventory and fill it with hybrids. They make more money off hybrids. Hybrids are proprietary, and they can't, you can't say, you know, you can't save the seed from them. You can't legally propagate, you know, these types of things. Are the property of the company that created the hybrid. So more hybrids would be lost if seed savers don't preserve them. Every plant we have that's grown commercially today and in gardens came from heirlooms. That's how they all started. So if there's ever, when they want a certain characteristic, say frost tolerance or red color, they consistently go back to the heirloom ones to pick up that that trait. Heirlooms are well suited for organic growing, and they're adaptable and hardy. So that's if you save seed, that adaptability is an important characteristic. Okay, seed packet jargon. These are things you're going to see on seed packets sometimes. And one of them is as soon as soil can be worked. That basically means it could be even now, although it's, it's going to be cold for another week. But once the frost has come out of the soil and it's not soggy and wet anymore, and you can, hoe it or plow it or rototill it or hand dig it, and it's not forming big wet clumps, that's what you're looking for to plant your seeds. So when it says as soon as soil can be worked in the spring, these are seeds like radishes that want to be planted immediately. You don't have to wait till it warms up. They like it cool. So that's what that means. When soil has warmed. I'm going to go into it a little bit later on when talking about what to plant when, but it means when the soil is warm, because we can be having 70-degree days and 40-degree nights and the soil is still relatively cool. And sometimes the plants that we're putting in the soil, the seeds, it's a little bit too cold for them soon. So, or at that point, so you want to make sure that when you plant your seeds, that the soil is warm, if that type of plant requires it. Examples of that are beans, squash, melons, things like that. They need a warm soil to grow. It's corns like that too. It's just going to sit there and sulk and possibly rot if the soil isn't warm enough. And there's rows and there's blocks and there's hills up in the upper right-hand corner. Those are examples of rows. That's kind of the traditional vegetable garden that a lot of us think of. And then below that is a block. Corn is one example of a wind pollinated type plant that has to be close to its neighbors. Corn won't the ears won't fill out well if it's planted in one long row. It's better rather than planting a 48-foot row, it's better to plant 4 rows of 12-foot. I hope I did that math right. So that you've got at least 4 rows, because when the corn puts up its tassels, that contains the pollen, and the pollen has to fall onto the ears, onto the silks. And that's how every silk corresponds to a kernel of corn. So if all of those silks don't get pollinated, you're going to have corn with empty rows, kind of misshapen sometimes. Hills are in the bottom left. There's basically a real traditional way of planting squash, pumpkins, melons, where you make a mound and you plant maybe 5 seeds in it, and then you thin to the, after they've all germinated, you thin to the strongest 2. And sometimes you'll see whole fields of hills when they're growing cucumbers and squash and things like that. A lot of those things can also be planted in rows. So you just have to have a lot of room in between the rows. You'll see last frost date. That varies from where you live. We're going to go into that a little bit more later for our region. If you are watching this from somewhere besides our, the area of our library, the Lyon Township, South Lyon area. If you're in another state, you will probably want to check. There's lots of charts online that show your last frost date, and see when yours is. That's really important because a lot of plants do not like to be, it will kill them if they start growing and then there's a frost. And the last one is days to harvest. With seed grown crops that you plant directly in the ground, that's, it may say 72 days. That's probably how long it will take if all things go pretty well till you'll get a harvest. Sometimes the days to harvest will mean from transplant. So you have to look on the seed packet and see if it says that. Because if you get if you're starting tomato seeds and they say, oh, they're 50 days, 60 days, 70 days, that might be from the point you transplanted it in the garden, not from the point that you started the seed. Okay, well, the big question when you're getting ready to save seeds is, do you start it inside or do you direct sow it outdoors? Consult your seed packet if available. If you go to seed swaps or seed libraries, you might not be seeing the original seed packet. And some seed packets have a lot of information and some are just dismal at how much information they put on. So you can get a lot from the seed packet if you have it. But you can also do it the old-fashioned way. There's books. Some seed catalogs have a lot of information in them. There's tons of websites out there. So there's lots of ways to, I mean, if you have a packet of I guess, say you have a packet of squash seeds and you say, well, do I direct sow it? You can just Google, direct sow squash or direct, there's just so easy to find that information now. You can also go to your library and ask, someone to help you. We're always happy to help with stuff like that. We've got lots of books and resources. You got to consider the days to harvest from the seed or transplant. We are in Michigan. We have, if we're lucky, we have 120 days. If we're really lucky, we have 145 days. I try, sometimes the longest things that I usually find are winter squash. A lot of those will say 110 days, 120 days. But and there's some squash varieties that just aren't even suited for our area. They're things that came from Southeast Asia and places like that they just don't grow well here because of our short time. So our average frost date for Lyon Township and South Lyon is May 21st through 31st. It is not Mother's Day. I hear constantly, I put everything out on Mother's Day. Well, Mother's Day's in the middle of May, and I don't know how many times we've had frosts between the middle of May and the end of May. We've had frosts the first week of June. So I really hesitate to put any really warm, loving crops out on Mother's Day. The best thing to do is about the third week of May, on the 21st, start looking at the long range forecast and the 10-day, 2-week forecast and see what the lows are looking like. And I've known years where we could have planted tomatoes in April if we'd only had a crystal ball, where we just didn't get any cold weather after that. But without that crystal ball, we have to kind of rely on statistics. And keeping in mind our first frost is usually October 11th through 20th. I always say October 14, 15. But last September, it was September 7th, we got our first frost. I covered things, it really caught me. There's a lot of things that I planted for my fall garden, didn't get far enough along before that happened. If you grow a big garden, it's literally impossible to cover everything. So just keep in mind, when you're planting things to try to not have anything that has 145, 150 days. Michigan's frost-free date in the spring can also be too soon for a lot of warm weather crops. And going back to what we mentioned before about the soil temperature, if you go, I've heard the farmers go out and put their bare bottoms on the soil, and that's how they tell if it's ready to plant. Now, I'm not suggesting that by any stretch of the imagination, but I mean, I would use my wrist. But if the soil seems at all cool, I would wait. Well, I have neighbors, maybe farmers can get away with that. But.
We have a question from Chris. Can you just start all the seeds inside?
No. Okay, I'm moving on. I know Chris, that's why I'm picking on him. No, you can't. Some do not start well inside at all, and I'm going to cover that in a few minutes.
Okay.
Because that is a valid question, and we're going to go into it. Okay, get to supplies. Some of the things you need for indoor seed starting. You need clean pots and trays. Recycled pots are great. I've got a slide or two on that coming up. You need a sterile soil mix. Labels and a Sharpie. Labeling is extremely important. Sharpie is one of the best commonly available pens for writing and not having it come off or with the moisture and UV sun exposure in the summer. A dibble is something that's used to create a hole to put a plant or a seed in. I think Sharpies are great dibbles. They're very multi-purpose. So I guess I have to, my background. Oh, there it is, Sharpie. A butter knife, the bigger end of a butter knife, anything that makes a decent sized hole and you can use your finger too, if you don't mind getting your fingers dirty. A heat mat is very helpful. Some plants, especially warm-loving plants like eggplants, peppers, tomatoes, love to have that bottom heat to germinate. They germinate faster and get going quicker. So it's not something you have to have. Some people make do with just setting them in a warm area. Some people have put them, I don't know if refrigerators they used to get warm on top. I don't think they do that anymore, but anywhere higher up is going to be a little bit warmer in the room. The problem with using a heating pad is that heating pads there's too much of the possibility that could be, you could get water on it and cause a short. The other thing is these heating pads meant for seedlings only reach a certain temperature. You could easily cook your seedlings with a heating pad. They just get too hot. So a heat mat meant for seedlings is your best bet. They're not very expensive. I've seen them for as little as $11 or $12. You can pay more for one with a thermostat. But even the simple ones that are relatively inexpensive without the thermostat, they pretty much hang at the right temperature for the majority of your seedlings. And you need light. Unfortunately, most windowsills don't quite cut it. You can run around and put following the sun, have them in the east during the day, then run them to the south and run them to the west so that you can maximize the direct sun on your seeds. But setting up a little light bank is really a great idea. Again, relatively inexpensive. These are things you're going to use from year to year. They're not disposable 1 year use things. So pots, you got tons of options. In my garden, what's the optimal thermostat? I think it's around 70 degrees, 68, 70 degrees for the heat mats. I have an assortment. I mean, people have used egg cartons. I'm not egg cartons are kind of shallow, but if you're planting something that's not going to be in there very long, like lettuce seedlings, I always like to start a few lettuce indoors, even though it comes from seed very easily outdoors. I've got, I'll start lettuce now, and then so that I can put it out and get it growing in early to mid-April, and then from that point on, I will sow it outdoors. But I love the containers that like spring mix comes in and other vegetables. Some of them even have a lid on them. Some of them even come with drainage holes in the bottom. But whatever you do, you should have drainage holes, even if it's an egg carton. You can cut off milk jugs. You can use the mushroom, packages that mushrooms come in the store. Plastic cups, styrofoam cups. A lot of people really hate the idea of throwing away disposable things. Well, rinse them out and save them for your seed starting. So there's just a few ideas. We're going to kind of see some more. The upper middle plant, those are plug trays, about the size of an egg carton. I have a lot of those at home, so I start my greens in those. Those are mustards and lettuces and kales and assorted other little early greens. So I get my first greens really early doing that. On the upper right, that's a soil blocker. That's probably the most expensive of all the options. It's a press that creates little pots out of just soil. There's nothing around them, and they also create a little dibble in there so you can plant your seeds. It's best to put them in some kind of a flat so that they don't just fall apart. Again, those are better, in my opinion, for things that are going to be transplanted out relatively quickly. So what do you plant them in? Your options are a commercial soil mix or seed starting mix, or a homemade blend. I just use a general commercial soil mix. As long as it's pretty finely milled. You don't want something with a lot of big chunks of bark and sticks, clumps of dirt, that's not well mixed. You get what you pay for in a commercial soil mix. Cheaping out to the cheapest ones, generally you find that they're heavy, there's not enough amendments in them, they're not light enough for seed starting. So I prefer an organic seed starter mix. I have one listed here. I'm not promoting that brand. It's just one that I have seen around the area at nurseries and stuff. And there's other brands too. This one in particular I like because it has the mycotone, they call it, but that's basically, it's got the mycorrhizae. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it's basically the beneficial fungus that lives in the soil and actually helps your plants grow. You can make a homemade blend. Seed starting ingredients, you can use all kinds of different things. You can use compost, peat or sphagnum moss, vermiculite, perlite, coconut coir, bark, as long as they're all finely milled. You don't have to use all of those things, but a mix of usually people will use peat or some type of moss, perlite, and then maybe one other thing like vermiculite or coir. Vermiculite helps actually retain water, whereas perlite creates air in the soil. So it kind of helps to have a little bit of both going on. By the time you buy all of those individual components though, I find it just easier to buy a commercial mix. Now, if you a lot of people who have nurseries or they grow market gardens, they're going to use a lot, and they maybe it pays for them to make their own, or maybe you just like it. Some people just like to do their own soil mix. You don't really have to put amendments in your seed starting mix because, as I mentioned before, the seed has all the energy it needs to go for a little while. Now, if you're going to be growing them in the pot for a while, like tomato seeds, if you're starting them in March or, and they're not going to be planting them out till the end of May, then you might want to put, when you transplant them on, you might want to put them in soil that has some amendments. Amendments are, there's all kinds of them. Bone meal, I've got listed here, kelp meal, blood meal, cottonseed, dolomite, alfalfa meal, worm castings, azomite, which is a mineral from Utah, and then mycorrhizae, the inoculation of the beneficial fungus type stuff. Now, funguses can be a bad thing or it can be a good thing. When in this case, it's a good thing. It's best to buy only what you can use in a year. You can store soil over. It tends to dry. One of two things tends to happen. It either dries out and it's really hard to rehydrate once it dries out, or it can grow mold on it. You're less likely to get the mold if you store it in a dry, cool, dark place. If it's really warm, it encourages that fungal growth inside of it. Now, if you do open up a bag of potting soil and there's some moldy-like substance in there, generally, if you take it off, you can still use the soil. I don't know if I'd use it for seed starting, but most people don't have any trouble using it. They just take it off, skim it off, and use the soil. You can always use it in outdoor pots. If you like I said, if you're a little squeamish about using it for indoors, you can use it to fill your, if you grow things outdoors. Okay. Now, bottom heat, we're covering that a little more closely here. Eggplants, peppers, and tomatoes love it. Okay, so I said 70, 75 degrees. And as I said, I guess I'm repeating myself, but look for warm spots in the house. Now, important thing when you're using bottom heat is after the germination has taken place, you remove it from the heat. Don't keep it on there. It's done its job, and you might have another flat ready to go on of the next type of plants. So generally, just remember to remove it. Covers and domes, a lot of seed starting kits that you buy at the store will have a dome over it. I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with these things. If your house is really dry, it probably will be beneficial. But again, just like the heat mat, once you see a sign of growth, you take that dome off because it can cause mold and fungus to grow very quickly inside of your little container. Don't put it in direct sun. It becomes basically a hothouse and can fry your seedlings. So like I said, use it if you want, but just keep it monitored and take it off as soon as the plants start to grow.
And should heat mats be left on 24 hours a day?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, keep it on. The seeds are still, if they get cold and clammy, it's just going to set them back. Light, as I discussed, a windowsill, if that's all you got. And a lot of people are on a budget. I mean, they can't go out and buy a bank of lights, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you can't start seeds. It does mean that, like I said, you might have to be a little more attentive if you put your seeds on the windowsill, that you might have to move them to the best light of the day, start out in the east and end up in the west but not everybody has all those windows either. So you can do the best you can. Up in the upper right, the fluorescent shop fixtures. I've probably purchased 100 of those over my life. I like them because you can put them on chains and lower them to just over the plants. Plants like to be, when they're grown under lights like this, only a few inches 3 to 4 inches away from the light source from the plants. If you don't, the plants start to stretch, which makes an unsatisfactory seedling. Now that these in the bottom right, now that these racks like this are readily available at Costco and Sam's Club and places like that, they become very popular for seed starting because you can hook the fluorescent fixtures right up to the top of them for the shelf below. They're sturdy and they hold, you can put a flat, you know, a nursery flat sideways, you know, so that you can get fit 4 on a shelf. You can also use them during the off season to grow house plants, or just for storage, you know, if you've got them. But you can put these anywhere. You can put them in your basement. You can put them in your spare bedroom. You can put them in your attic. You know, wherever it's, you know, you can have your light source be anywhere you want it to be. If your flats are under lights and they're not close enough, and the lights, for one reason or other, the way they're affixed, you can't lower them, then you can raise the seedlings. One thing you can do is put under them is blocks of wood. You can use stacks of newspaper. The newspaper is kind of nice because every day as the seedlings grow, you can pull out 1 or 2 and just slightly lower them, because you don't want the seedlings to be touching the lights. LED lights are really popular right now, and they've been coming down in price. So that's an option too. Any of these choices, it's up till now, it's been kind of an expense situation, but now LED lights are becoming really readily available. It doesn't really matter, fluorescent, LED, which one you use. For the amount of time that these plants are under them, you don't really have to worry about getting grow light fixtures or grow light bulbs. They do just fine with the regular ones. Sometimes people like to put a cool white and a warm white in there to get a little bit broader spectrum. But generally your seedlings aren't going to be under that long. Now, if you're growing house plants and other things year round under these lights, then you have to kind of tend more to what type of bulb you're using. But for seed starting, you can pretty much cheap out and just use the regular light, because before you know it, you're going to be planting them in the garden. Air circulation is important. You can get little whisper fans, clamp-on fans. You can even use a large fan in the room so that it's moving. You wouldn't want to point it directly at your seedlings necessarily, but as long as air is moving about in the room. When plants and seedlings are growing outdoors, there's wind moving them. They move kind of to face, you know, to face the sun. Sometimes during the day, it's imperceptible when you look at them, but sometimes they actually follow the sun across the sky. And so moving the leaves mimics nature in the sense that it forces them to build a stronger stem to stand up to the breeze. And also, having good air circulation reduces fungal outbreaks. You're less likely to get mold and mildew and gross things happening on your in your seeds. So, like I said, just use whatever you've got, or you don't have to go into a lot of expense for this. It's just get the air moving a little bit in the room, and your plants will thank you. Now, some seeds need special treatment before you plant them. Pre-soaking just means you put them in water, or, you know, if you don't want to put them in water, you can put them like in a wet towel inside of a bin and just let them sit overnight so that they start soaking. It shaves days off of your germination time, especially when you're planting outdoors. And pre-sprouting, again, you can put them in wet paper towels or kitchen towels, and just so they're moist, but not, you don't want them to be just soggy, just sopping wet, but moist enough to the seeds can take up that water. And then when you watch the seed for just that little snout to start poking out, and then it's starting to germinate, and then you put it in the ground. This is most often done with beans and things like that, or for older seeds. Sometimes if I've had seeds that I've saved or someone has given me and I know they're 6 years old, I might want to pre-sprout them. So I know exactly which ones are going to sprout, and I don't waste garden space or pots on something that's not going to grow. Legumes like beans and peas, you can use a soil inoculant that it helps them grow better, be more productive. Not absolutely necessary, but it's really a nice thing to have if you can find it. Tiny seeds, some people really have a hard time with like carrot seeds and things like that. Now, some companies sell pelleted seed, which are very tiny seeds that have a coating around them that makes them about the size of a BB, maybe slightly smaller. Those are easier to handle if you have trouble handling very tiny seeds. Some people in the lower right-hand picture, they will put them on a paper towel or tissue, something very thin paper, and space them out correctly. And they just lay them on the ground and put the soil over them when it's time to plant them. But you can use like maybe a flour and water mix to kind of adhere them to the Kleenex or the paper toweling. And it's a little hint. I generally don't bother with that, but sometimes people say I like to do it in the winter when I have the time, and then in the spring I just roll them out and they're ready to go. You have to worry about critters sometimes. I have a lot of people that do the seed starting in their basement or out in a barn or a shed, especially. Mice just love it when you grow a little salad garden for them. And so what I've done before in the past when that's been a problem is made little like hardware cloth covers for my seed starting trays. And you can repel them with the ultrasonic repellers, or trap them if whatever way you deem. I'm not advocating for violence against small rodents, so don't yell at me for suggesting traps, because there are humane ones. So again, I kind of wanted to go back over a little bit of the possibilities for pots. I think this illustration here, I've never done this. I just found this picture recently, but they're basically, it looks like juice jugs that they cut out the one side of them and put them on their side. And of course, any kind of pot, you've got to have drainage holes in the bottom. But I thought that's a really neat way to, they looks like they've started a different variety in each one, and they write on it, on the lid, what it is. I just thought that was cool. But you can reuse nursery flats and pots. If you do, it's always a good idea to sterilize them. You can make up a weak bleach solution in a bucket, or I like to use a big wide Rubbermaid bin is what we generally do. It's about maybe 2 feet by 15 inches by 2 feet. And you can put, just a weak bleach solution in there and soak your flats and pots and scrub them out if they've got clumps of dirt in them. You can also use clean food containers, yogurt containers, anything. And as I mentioned before, egg cartons are usable. You can, they're not very big, so you can use them for small things like greens mostly. There's compressed growing pellets, or Jiffy Pots. That's a brand name, but there are also these compressed pellets, basically, that if you soak them in water, they expand and make like a little self-contained pot. We talked about soil blocks. We didn't talk about peat pots yet. Peat pots are a compressed pot made from compressed peat. They're one of the their claims to fame is that they can be planted right in the dirt. You don't have to take them out of it. So if the roots come through the paper pot or the peat pots, you can just plant them in the ground. A little hint though is always to tear off the edge of the peat pot down to the soil level when you plant them outdoors, because they can actually wick water away from your plants. So you want to make sure the peat pots are down level with or underneath the soil. Paper pots, I've got a picture in a subsequent slide, but they're basically pots made out of paper. Very easy, very cheap, readily available. Cardboard tubes, like from toilet paper or paper towels, you can cut those apart and fold them in and use a little bit of masking tape to hold them, to make the bottom. And then soil blocks, as we talked about before. Those are all options for pots. No one should
Lori,
not start. Oh, sorry.
Lori says the MSU extension says 9-to-1 on the bleach solution, just as a rule of thumb.
Yeah, well, and it's good. I seldom measure, but sounds about right. I usually fill it up and then I go glug, which maybe, but yeah, you don't want it, too heavy on the bleach. But then again, you don't want it so light that it doesn't do any good. There's different ways of pre-treating seeds. And we talked about pre-soaking already and pre-sprouting, but one we haven't talked about yet is scarification, which is a fancy way of saying nicking the seed coat. And seeds that need the seed coat nicked often also benefit from pre-soaking too. So all of these things, but I generally, with morning glories, maybe some beans, maybe okra, I've never done it with, although it supposedly speeds up germination, but you can soak them. I guess soaking but some plants just can't make it through that seed coat well without a little help. Sea kale is one of the most onerous of all of the ones. They actually have quite a hefty seed coat on them that you have to soak them and literally cut the seed coat off to get to the little seed inside. You have to really want your sea kale to go through all that, but it's not hard. It's just a little time consuming. You can also use a file, which is in the middle picture, a little rat tail file. Or you can use a fingernail clippers to kind of nick the seed coat. You don't have to, like I said, just file it thin in one spot, just so that it has a little bit time. It cuts off that germination time a little bit. Stratification is a chilling period. You're not going to find that with your basic garden plants. Most popular garden plants that we all grow don't require that, but you might see that when you're planting some perennials. The chilling period can be accomplished by planting the seeds in dirt and putting them inside a plastic bag and putting them in the fridge. Or you can plant them in the fall so that they go naturally through, or you can plant them in pots and put them in the garden, or you can plant them directly into the garden in the fall. That gives your natural, chilling period. That is what they're looking for. Some seeds just don't germinate until they've been through what they consider a winter. Some things need a combination of those methods. So again, just looking up online or looking at the seed packet, to find out if it has any special requirements. But the good news is that the majority of garden vegetable seeds don't need any of these real extreme measures to get them to germinate.
I'm sorry. How long do you stratify as a general rule in the fridge?
Yeah, it's kind of you just look at, like I said, look it up and find out, because some things only need maybe 3 or 4 weeks. Some things need 3 or 4 months. So, and like I said, I find it easier to stratify things by planting the pot and putting, and if you feel squeamish about putting them out in your garden, like maybe rodents or bunnies will eat them or something, you can keep them in an unheated garage or barn, and just where they're going to think they've been cold, is one of the ways you can fool some plants into, blooming and producing something the first year. And one of the things that's fun to do is artichokes. Artichokes creates a very large plant, and the places they're native to don't get as cold as winter as we do. So I wouldn't suggest putting something like that outside over the winter. But if you plant them, say in January, and then about now put them outside, so they're still getting, it's not going down to zero, but they're still getting some nice cold nights, and you only have to do that for a handful of weeks, and then you bring them up, and that's after they've started growing. You wait till they germinate to throw them outside. So it's just kind of, you're fooling them into thinking they've been through a California or winter or wherever they're native to, probably the Mediterranean.
So you just take the entire pot and put it outside.
You can.
Okay.
Another thing you can do, if you don't want to do that, is to put the seeds in some soil in a plastic Ziploc bag. That probably would take up less room if you were using a refrigerator. If you're using a really fine seed, it might be kind of, you eventually you're going to have to pull that bag out and plant it. So you would maybe fill a pot about 2/3 full of soil, and then put your baggie full of soil and seeds on there, and then put a little more on the top. I mean, you just got to fool them somehow. Keep in mind that some plants need light to germinate, and that's something you're always looking for when you're in the seed description too on the packet. So, if you're stratifying a plant that needs light to germinate, then you're going to have to not sow them very deep. That's when it's better just to put them in a pot, press them into the surface, and put a bag around them and put them in the fridge. That way you don't have to mess around with a baggie full of seeds and dirt. So the depth is, you want to double or triple the diameter of the seeds at the smallest point. Or some people say up to the first knuckle, but basically the larger the seed, the deeper you plant it. Little fine seeds like on the far left picture, you probably would just press those in to the top of the soil and water them in. If you do put something over the top of it, just the finest little bit of fine soil, or when I say soil, I don't mean really soil, finely ground, or even some vermiculite, something like that, that's super light. But if a fine seeds, they'll struggle to get through a lot of soil. So you want to keep them really close to the surface. Then sometimes you have, like in the lower right, there's marigold seeds. They're long and skinny. So it's like, well, okay, what is do we go by the length or the width? So you go by the width. You want to put them I would put those about triple the width of the plant. So about 1/8 to 1/4 inch deep. Lettuce seeds, you only have to put in about 1/8 of an inch deep, barely cover them. Just remember, you don't want to over cover very fine seeds. And then of course, a big lima bean, you're going to poke down about, a couple inches, maybe even 3 inches. So, you just kind of have to, I guess it's common sense, I guess, is basically what you use. So we've got different kinds of methods for sowing your seeds and when you're starting them indoors. The first was broadcast. That's basically where you just take the seed packet or put them in your hand and gently spread them about willy-nilly on top of the soil, and then you cover them, again, going by the seed packet, you either press them into the soil if they're very fine, or you cover them with the appropriate amount. Some plants do very well with this method. Most of the alliums do, the onions and leeks and things like that. It's not always recommended for some seeds. You wouldn't want to do it with your great big bean seeds or something like that, but you're not going to be starting those indoors likely anyway. Or you can plant them in rows in a seed tray. Bottom right kind of shows that. That's the method that I generally use personally, because I can plant a row of a single kind of seed. Sometimes I make 2 or 3, maybe I'll only plant a row of maybe 3 inches and then put another tag in and do another 3 inches. And it just depends on how many I'm looking for. But again, I'm not wasting any soil. You have to take these after they've germinated and put them into another pot, but you know exactly how many seeds you've got, how many have germinated. When you're playing around with older seed or seeds that are very, when you only have a few of them, this is a good way to start them so that you know exactly what you're dealing with, because some seeds just naturally don't have a good germination rate. For every, you might have to plant 4 to get 1 to germinate. So I like this method a lot. The last major method on the lower right is just putting 2 to 3 seeds in each cell of a flat or a pot or whatever you want to use. And then when they germinate, that's why, because you don't want any empty cells. So that's why you put 2 or 3 in. And then if they all 3 germinate, then you take little scissors or snippers or your fingernails and just snip out the ones you don't want. Keep the strongest one and snip out the other 2. And you want to do that relatively quickly. Seeds that are planted very close together can get leggy if they're forced to compete with close neighbors. So you don't want to, you want to clip out those little extra seedlings fairly soon after they germinate. These are actually seed pictures I took today out in my greenhouse. I am lucky enough to have a greenhouse. That wasn't always the case. Many years I didn't have one, and I started under lights in the basement. But this is a seed tray on the right, and it's, as I said, it's many different plants in there. You can germinate a whole bunch of plants in one of these seed things, and then I'll go over transplanting them in a minute, how you get them out of there. You don't have, I get like kitty litter pans for this. That's my, with holes drilled in the bottom. On the upper right, I just had some flowers, annual flowers, maybe. The pissy toes might not be an annual. The other 3 are. And in one of them on the far right or far left, the verbena, that one was one that you just pressed into the soil. It's a tricky little germinator, but it should be showing in a day or 2. But the one thing to consider too, when you're planting things together, is plant things that are going to grow at about the same rate. Just trust me, if you plant a mustard plant next to an eggplant, the mustard plant's going to grow really fast and shade out all of its neighbors. So it's best to kind of keep like with like. Start all your tomatoes in one tray. Peppers and eggplants are good together. They grow about the same rate. But you don't want to put something super fast. And then, with flowers, it can happen too. Like I like to grow calendula every year. Well, calendula, it likes cool temperatures, and it germinates really fast, and it grows really fast, and it can overpower, like the little guys like in here really quickly. The bottom right picture is just my seed starting so far this year. Along the back, I have sort of a fetish with alliums. I like leeks, onions, shallots, bunching onions. It's all kinds of stuff back, and that's in the back row against the back. They're up and coming because I plant those in February. Most in the front of those, in the kitty litter trays, are things I just planted in the last week. So I kind of spend my weekends starting seeds. So I've got all my eggplants and peppers going. Hot peppers I started a week before because hot peppers take longer than sweet peppers to germinate and grow. So you learn this over the time or by reading, what to start when. Next week will probably be, now I've also started all of my broccolis and cabbages and things because they can go out in the middle of April. Obviously the eggplants and peppers and will have to stay in until the end of May, but the broccolis and things, they start at the same time because they like cool weather. So they're going to go out in about 6 weeks. Maybe 4 weeks if they get big enough. Soon coming up will be tomatoes and greens that I start indoors. So, I'm going to go over that a little bit more later, but I'm just kind of saying, it's a process, especially if you try to grow everything you're going to grow in your garden. These are some examples of seeds that were broadcast. Things that do particularly well with that method that I found are celery, celeriac, parsley, and of course the onions. The onions can stay. I love to use the big containers from the greens from the store because they're nice and deep. And with onions, I broadcast them like that, and they're going to stay there until I plant them out, and probably the middle to end of April. So they just don't mind being close to their neighbors, and they grow up, and you just tease them apart when you go to plant them outside. Now the celery and parsley, I will prick out into individual pots later on. I don't keep them growing like this, although it has happened. And they can be pretty forgiving as long as you don't let them grow too closely together. Okay, after you've got your seeds planted, your germination, yay, it's what we've all been waiting for. The first seeds leaves that come up are the Cotyledons, and they're not the true leaves. They're just the little seed leaves that are inside the, stored inside the seed. They come out fast. They begin to gather energy from the sun. They also have stored energy inside them to feed the plant. And then following those will be the true leaves. And the true leaves are going to look more like the plant. On the lower right, we've got it looks like a celery plant. Or close relative. So as you can see, now it's starting to look like a celery plant. The first two leaves are just long little strappy things. And as I mentioned before, seeds germinate and grow at different rates. So try to grow like with like when in the trays and flats. Is a greenhouse heated? Yes, it is. It's actually, we have a business, so we have to keep it heated all year round. That's, like I said, that works for me now. But I was able to do all of this without the greenhouse too. I don't want to give the impression you have to have a greenhouse in order to seed start, because you do not. What variety of onions go best in Michigan? Long day onions are the best for Michigan. That's a whole nother science, but there's long day onions, short day onions, and day neutral. But it has to do with the fact that because our days start out short and get longer as the summer progresses till we get to the solstice, the summer solstice. That's what triggers the onions to grow and form their bulbs. Let's see. Outside gardening, which direction is best to grow vegetables? Well, south side, yes. If you don't have two giant maple trees, and their south side of your yard like I do. But yeah, as you observe the sun going across the sky, at the summer solstice, it's going to be its highest point in the sky. But up to that point, and then after that point, it gets lower and lower in the sky. So you want to make sure that you are thoughtful about placing trellises and growing very tall plants like corn. When you're planning out your garden, you don't want to grow corn on the south side of your onions or your broccoli, because that's going to broccoli won't care. But it's say your peppers and eggplants that don't get as tall as corn, it could be shaded, and they like a lot of sun and they like a lot of warmth. So you do have to be thoughtful about dry. I tend to, it doesn't really matter if your rows go north or south or east or west, as long as you're paying attention to what you're planting where, and think about shade. Let's see, I guess we can go on. Some of the little problems that you have with seedlings are usually caused by overwatering or lack of air circulation or lack of light, all of those important things. Damping off is actually a fungal disease. That's the top right, where your little seedling will come up, and all of a sudden it just falls over, and it's basically rotted right off at the base. And that's your best, because that fungus is in the soil. I usually, if it's massive, I just dump it and start over. If it's just a handful of them, sometimes you can save them by removing the bad ones and correcting the problems, whether it was overwatering. You've got to have a lot of drainage, drainage holes, so even though you want to keep your plants moist, you don't want to keep them too moist. And I've heard it described several ways. Some people say that the correct level of moisture feels like a cake, like a cupcake. It's not moist, it's not too moist, it's not too dry, it's just right. Some people say a sponge that's been wrung out and it's still moist, but it's not heavy. So those are kind of way. You don't want your soil to feel heavy. That means you're overwatering it, or it's not draining fast enough. Mold can also grow. The lower left picture shows that can be a really bad sign. Again, increasing air circulation, maybe it's a little too wet, maybe not enough light. Though, mold likes moisture and darkness, so it may be a little bit more light. And in that picture, you can see how leggy those little seedlings already are getting. They definitely are not getting enough light. So, those things can be corrected. On the lower right, definitely leggy seedlings, mostly and you can see how they're reaching toward the window. That if the legginess is caused by being grown too closely together, and they're competing for light and space. And it's also just, they get that way just trying to get to the light. They're stretching for the light. That's not a great thing. It's not good for your soil. That's why I like the fluorescent lights. If you can't have in a greenhouse where they're getting a lot of lights, or fluorescent lights, or LEDs that you can put real close to the plants, that keeps them, you want them nice and sturdy. You want the stems to be thick and short and stocky, rather than, and then of course, adding some air circulation in there is going to, the little tomatoes in that flat, they should have been thinned long before to 1. And I'm assuming those are tomatoes. They might be lettuce. It could be anything. You can hardly tell. They've only got their cotyledon leaves, but they kind of look like tomatoes to me. And so you can't wait very long to cut out the ones you're not going to keep. You want to thin it down to 1 relatively quickly, so they don't have to compete for light with their neighbors.
So Pam, do you like seed mats that conduct water?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Chris, we might need a few more details. And Amy wants to know, do you water overhead or underneath?
If you water overhead for when you first planted your seeds, you should use a very gentle, I thought I had a watering slide. It must be out of, it's coming up, but yeah, you want a very gentle, you don't want to blast the seeds so that they're flying everywhere. You can use a spray bottle right at first, so you can control the amount of water if you've got a real, oh, yeah. So yeah, but bottom watering is great because if you have a slightly larger container than your flat, and you can set it in there until the water has been wicked up through the and that's a really foolproof way. But you can't leave it in there. You got to pull it out and let it drain. But so bottom watering or gentle top watering are the best. Later on, after they've really settled in, it's not such a big deal. Yeah, I see what you mean. The wicket. Yeah, I do have some of those where it's a setup with a reservoir and a mat of that conducts that pulls water up out of the reservoir, and then the pots sit right on that mat. I haven't used them since I had the greenhouse, but I used them a lot when I was growing inside, especially when I would be, before my husband retired and I, there was nobody there all day. And so if it was a type of plant that I didn't want him to make sure that it didn't get dried out, those are a nice type to use. Yeah, you just have to make sure the reservoir stays full. You still have to check it. So if you've grown your plants in using a seed flat method where they're all, or a broadcast method where they're all in together, and it's time to transplant them into their own pot, you just gently, I like to use a butter knife, or when I say a butter knife, is not a steak knife with a pointy end and sharp, but your standard knife that comes with your cutlery. Something like that, or you can just do it with your hands, or you can use like a popsicle stick, anything that you can get up underneath that little plant and kind of tease them apart from the seedlings. And then you pick it, it's in the lower left picture. I think it's a she. It's picking it up by the leaves and not by the stem. Preferably you're using the cotyledon leaves if they're still big enough. But the stems are that's where all the nutrients come up through the stem, and you can easily damage a stem by pinching it with your fingers. So you try to only hold them by the leaves if you can. Make a little hole in the pot. In the middle one, middle picture, it's like that. I've used the Sharpie to make the hole, and then there's a little lettuce seedling there ready to put down in the hole. You just kind of gently put it in the hole, tamp it, tamp the soil around it. And on the far right, there's some that are all finished. Those are tomato seedlings. Now, tomato seedlings are set apart from literally every other seedling because you can plant them deeper than the depth that they were actually growing in the ground in the seed flat. Most things do not care for that, but tomatoes can actually form roots all along the stem. And so you can plant them deeper than they were growing. That's especially nice if they've unfortunately gotten a little leggy. Now those little tomatoes in that picture, those can stay in that pot till they're several inches tall, but at some point you may want to pot them up into even a bigger pot, because you're not going to plant them out till the end of May or beginning of June. So, oftentimes mine are in a gallon-sized pot before it's planting time, because I'm just impatient and I want tomatoes fast. You certainly don't have to do that. It's just going to take, it'll take a week or two longer for them to start producing. And then just water in, again, gently at first. Once they're well rooted, you don't have to treat them like little hothouse flowers. You could just water them as you normally would. Is this
now
a good time? Oh yeah. Actually, it's a hair early for tomatoes. I would probably wait another week. I'm debating on whether to start mine this coming weekend or the weekend after, because they do grow so fast. They grow faster than almost anything else. So if you start your tomatoes now, you certainly can, but be prepared to have to pot them up more than once, to a bigger pot. But like I said, that the good part about that is that you got a really big tomato when it's time to plant them outside. This picture is kind of a 3-stage picture. On the upper right is a seed flat where I have it looks like greens. I see lettuce, I see mustards in there, things like that. Again, those can all be direct sown in the garden a little bit later, but I want these things growing, so I always start them sooner. And then I've got a little seedling flat, a little plug tray next to them, and I've literally taken all of that one type of plant out and set it there so I can tease them apart and plant them. And then the bottom tray is finished. Each one's in its own little cell now. If you have extra, you can just compost them. You have to be a little heartless sometimes. You can't save everything. Or you can if you got unlimited room. But even with a greenhouse, I don't, because I have to compete with we grow Coleus as a cash crop, and I have to fight for every square inch for my vegetables. Go watering seedlings. Here we go. So spray bottle, misting wand, bottom watering and wicking. That's what we covered. Bottom watering in the lower picture, where basically just set the plant down inside a bigger container and let it soak water up from the bottom. It's a good way to get nutrients into it too. Is the wicking. You can use a watering can. I don't recommend that until they're really well rooted in. You just have to kind of use your judgment. When they look really sturdy and rooted in, then you can kind of be less careful. You don't really need to fertilize right away. It's not necessary to put seed start or fertilizer in seed starting soil if you're going to be potting them up into regular soil relatively soon. But then it's a good idea to give them a little bit of fertilizer. You want to do a gentle fertilizer. I prefer liquid types rather than at first. Later on, time release fertilizers are really the best for later on if you're keeping things in pots and stuff. I prefer than foliar feeding is where you basically spray it right onto the leaves and it absorbs it through the leaves. I prefer natural ones. The fish emulsion and kelp extract are a couple of my favorites. Some people swear by like Miracle Grow and Peters. So you can buy them in little canisters. It's a powder usually that you mix in like X amount of teaspoons per gallon. I usually recommend that you dilute it fairly extreme dilution, because your little tiny new transplants can sometimes burn with too much fertilizer. So, I would put maybe a quarter of the amount that you would do for a plant that's planted outdoors for your seedlings. Fish emulsion and kelp extract, things like that are a little milder, so you could dilute those by half. you can, if you want to add things like compost, all those other amendments I talked about, the bone meal, dolomite, things like that, you can add all those things at transplant time when you're planting them out either into a bigger pot or when you're planting them out in your garden. It's all, your plant's only as good as what it's growing in. Yeah, the Coleus. If you're kind of starting Coleus from seeds, you have to start them quite early. You probably have to start them about February because they take a long time to germinate and grow and to get to the size where you want them to be to plant them out. We start our Coleus from cuttings, so we don't do seeds. Cuttings are faster and they're exact clones of the mother plant, whereas seeds, there's not very many seed varieties out there compared to how many clone plants there are. But yeah, definitely can start Coleus from seed, but you probably would have had to done it by now. Compost tea. Yeah, it is a little late to do Coleus from seed. You can always try though, they just will be ready later. It's not that far. I mean, we're still only in the middle of March, so. Compost tea, I don't usually, only because it's like, it's a process, and with working and taking care of my garden pretty much is my, my hobby. So I'm definitely spending a lot of time in compost tea. Well, it doesn't, it sounds like it doesn't take very long, but it's just one extra step. I generally just use compost. But compost tea is a nice thing to give to your things, especially when you're first transplanting them. Basically, that's taking some compost, maybe a couple of cups inside a net bag and suspending it in a bucket of water and letting it kind of steep for a while, and then using that water to water your plants. It's certainly wonderful. But you asked, do I ever make it? Which is not very often. It takes forethought and planning.
Pam is a busy lady.
Yeah.
So it is 8 o'clock. So if there's anyone who needs to sign off, we are recording this. So if you need to catch up on the end at a later time, you can do that. But we will keep going. And
the other question is using a bubbler. Some people do. They use like a little fish tank pump and an air stone and put it down in there so that it moves the compost tea around, and it probably makes it ready faster, but not everybody does. Yeah, I'm going to try and clip along here a little faster. Because it is getting late. Times to transplant outdoors, yay! So you got your little guys this far. They're ready to go. Well, the last thing you want to do after your tender, loving care, all these weeks getting them ready to plant outdoors, is you don't want to throw them out and have them immediately look up at the sun and scream and die. If they've been under lights, if they've been in a greenhouse, if they've been in a basement, they just aren't ready for the rigors of outdoors, right away. And this is true even if you buy transplants from a greenhouse or on plant nursery, is everything should be hardened off before you put them out. If you order mail order plants, they should be hardened off. Basically, hardening off is a process by which you take them out for a few hours a day and put them in a protected place where they're not getting hit with, the sun all day. If they ideally get a little morning sun and they're protected from the wind. And you kind of reduce the watering. So you still want to keep them moist enough, but you got to start making them harder. They get, they've got to stop being babied from their little hothouse life. And you can put some, when you transplant them, you give them compost and fertilizer, but you don't have to do it for very long. The left-hand picture is just my, a bunch of my seedling trays that I just throw them out in the garden. I have raised beds, and so I throw them out on the raised beds and bring them in later. I don't, they're not quite ready to stay out all night. A lot of people use stairways. It's a great, if you've got a porch that's kind of, especially if it's facing east, that'd be ideal. But, you put them out there for a couple hours if it's in the south, let them get some of that full sun. They just don't want it all day long. Keep an eye on the watering, keep an eye on the wind. If it's super windy, you want to put them in a protected spot. They're just not, wind can do actually as much damage as the sun. It can actually burn the leaves. So you just kind of, for a few days, just kind of baby them a little bit, get them used to the outdoors gradually. Now, if you're direct, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about direct sowing outdoors. These are seeds. Most people, they're beans or squash, they're melons, things like that. Any of your root crops, you want to direct sow those outdoors. They're not great candidates for starting inside. So you have to think about the timing and the weather. You have to prepare your planting area. Your garden is only as good as your soil is. So if your garden is, not well deeply tilled the first time, once your garden is prepared, you don't really have to till it all the time, like every spring. You can, put nice layers of mulches on and just plant down into that. But either way, you need to plant into a prepared area. Planting depth, when you're planting seeds, it's pretty much the same as your seeds inside. You want to plant them about 3 times the size of the seed at the thinnest point. Beans, that usually means about 1 inch to 2 inches, depending on the size, sometimes 3 if it's a big old lima bean. And then spacing and thinning. You've got, sometimes you want to plant your seeds about twice as thick as you will eventually be growing them. So because not every seed is going to come up. Birds are going to steal your seeds. Mice are going to steal your seeds, your seedlings. They come out and they go, oh, look at this nice tender little shoot. I think I'll eat that. And so you overplant with the idea that either you or nature is going to thin them out. And you can use the same methods in outdoor as in. On the upper left is the broadcast method. I like to use that for quick growing salad greens, mustards, arugula, lettuce, just kind of basic. And some people use like a salt shaker type of a contraption, maybe not salt, but like for herbs or something. It's something with bigger holes. And you can just gently broadcast it over the area. Take a little soil and sprinkle it over the top. And then you can just cut it with scissors if you want to. If you cut if you're growing greens and you cut the greens above the growing tip, they actually will keep growing back. They're cut and come again, I guess you could say. So on the left, the right top is a mound, as we talked about before. If you want to put, usually used for vining things like squash and pumpkins and melons and cucumbers. You poke probably 5 or 6 seeds in there and thin to the strongest 2. All of those vining crops are also really good candidates for growing on trellises too. So you can, weave them up through a trellis and that's a big space saver. You can grow a lot more vining crops than if you're letting them sprawl across the garden. Bottom left is just some, I think those are peas just growing in one of my raised beds. You can see some snow there. It doesn't hurt them. Peas like to be planted out pretty early. Now, there's this old planter's tale of, that if you put your peas out in by St. Patrick's Day. Well, on St. Patrick's Day in Michigan, we can have 2 feet of snow. So that's not really a realistic goal. Again, watch the long range temperatures. You know, they could, once they are up and growing, they certainly will survive a snow and a frost. But if it's going to get down to, you know, the single digits, that's going to set them back. They may survive, but it's going to set them back. You haven't really gained any time by getting them out there early. It's kind of a false economy of time in a way, starting things too early outdoors. I generally have no problem starting seeds in the beginning of April for peas and other, like fava beans are the same ways. The lower right is our beet seedlings that just came up. Root crops are another one that they just don't transplant well. So you're better off just planting them in. Beets can be planted maybe not as early as peas, but I usually put beets in between the middle and end of April. Because we have had some really hard freezes, and even though they survive, you're going to lose some. Same with carrots. And you can always throw something over them if we're going to have a real hard frost, or if even better, if you have some type of a, you know, a hoop system where you can throw a blanket or some row cover over it or something, you know, just to protect them, keep a few degrees higher. So again, it doesn't pay to start too early. There's succession sowing. This picture is a great example where obviously at the end toward the bottom is the first planting and the second planting, and maybe they've already taken some out and planted again, but it kind of moves across there. It's the same plant, they just keep going, so you always have more. Usually done with greens. It can be done with root crops. And they don't always have to be in the same spot. You know, you can plant your beets in April in one spot and then start some in May in another spot. And you can keep going and starting root crops usually during the summer. And so if you can have them in the fall as well.
You still mound things if you're growing them on a trellis?
Not necessarily. I usually do them in a row if I'm doing them on a trellis. You just have to space them out several inches, but since as long as their roots aren't competing too much, as long as there's 6 to 8 to 12 inches in between them, you certainly can grow them up and let the vines do the crawling, and they're really easy to grow on trellises. Yes, I do use drip irrigation in the raised beds. It's not necessary. It's easy. Again, when you can go out there and flick a lever and you got 18 beds being watered at the same time, that's an awesome thing. And I didn't have that. I've only had that for 2 or 3 years. So we're kind of getting ready for our old age, getting to the point where we're adding some of these nicer things. Certainly not necessary. You just have to pay attention. Planting out to a cold frame is a great idea. You just have to make sure that the cold frame is open every morning, or you will cook your plants. The one in this picture is on like a little pulley system. You can raise them up with a stick. There's little hydraulic openers you can buy too, which we found to be the best solution for us because, again, everybody's trying to get out the door in the morning. One morning you forget to open up that cold frame and you've just lost all of your work up to that point. So because they've just fried. So the little pneumatic ones, as the temperature gets higher, not pneumatic, hydraulic ones, I hope I'm using the right words. I'm not very mechanical, but they basically, as the temperature rises, they open open them up, and they may not open them really wide, but enough so that they don't cook. You can use cloches. The wall of water is a type of cloche that's up in the upper corner. Just anything. And then the spun bonded row cover in the lower left hand is my favorite. It's light, it's easy. You can pull it on pull it off during the day, pull it on over the night. You can use sheets and things like that too, bed sheets, but they're a little heavy on your plants, whereas the spun bonded row cover is very light. You just have to have either pegs, ground staples, or rocks or bricks or something to hold it down so it doesn't blow away during the night. Some things don't like to be transplanted. I mentioned the root crops, but squash, melons, cucumbers, corn, they do not like to be sown into the garden, or they do not like to be planted in pots ahead of time. I've actually done side-by-side comparisons where I planted zucchini in a pot and then planted it out a couple of weeks later, after about where these are now in this picture. And then at the same time I planted out those early starts, I planted seeds at the same time and found that the seed grown ones caught up and passed the ones that I had started ahead of time. So again, it's another false economy of time. You're not really gaining anything. Some people swear by it. In this picture, it looks like they planted 2 seeds per cell. And he's cutting one out with scissors. Whoops, sorry about that. And he's also planted them in peat pots. And I'm going to go into the next slide and talk a little bit about, if you feel you must start those types of plants indoors, you need to plant them in a pot that you can plant directly in the ground. Peat pots, they're really only good for this. I've tried to start things in peat pots that needed to be indoors longer, and they tend to disintegrate and get a little slimy or moldy over time. They're much better used for things where they're only going to be in a short time and then they're going into the garden. Some people really find that the roots have difficulty getting through the peat pots. So you may want to scuff up or you put little tears into the pot before you plant it in the ground. Paper pots are free and easy to make. That's in the illustration. There's little paper pot makers you can buy. You can also just wrap newspaper around the end of and you can make them any size you want. But if you take a water bottle and wrap the paper around and then fold it underneath, and you can just fold it, or you can use a little piece of masking tape. Masking tape usually disintegrates fairly well. So you can use a little bit to hold it shut. And then those compressed growing pellets or Jiffy Pots is another option too. But again, the only time I can see that it makes sense is if you're growing a type, again, I was talking about there are some types of gourds and squash that are eaten in more tropical climates than ours, Southeast Asia, India, and a lot of people that live here want to grow those because they've grown up with them. They think they're delicious, but they also have a very long growing season. So you might want to start those indoors. And if you do, just use one of these methods and you'll have better luck. Because they have such a long growing season that's hard to get them to the point where you can eat them before we start getting frost. And they do not like frost. No tropical plants do. So I'm kind of going to zip through this really fast. Toilet paper rolls cut in half. Yeah, you can use those. Again, with the mold, as long as it's short term, I wouldn't use it for a long term thing. Like I wouldn't plant my tomatoes and peppers and things in them. But if you're going to plant something outdoors relatively quickly, you can use the paper rolls. The rest of these slides are what to start when. And if you want, sometimes when I'm watching a program like this, I just get out my cell phone and take pictures of the slides. But we also will have this presentation on our website, a link to it. So if you want to scroll through at your leisure later on, you can. But February, that's when you generally start your onions and shallots and leeks. Perennial vegetables like asparagus, or and the perennial herbs like thyme, winter savory, lavender. Lavender, actually, you might even want to start in January. That is a real slower grower, and it benefits from stratification. If you can start it in January and put it in the fridge for a few weeks and pull it out, you're going to have better germination. Annual flowers like begonias, petunias, pansies, viola, and coleus. Somebody asked about coleus, and all of these plants just take a while to get to the size where they go in your garden. Violas and pansies are a little bit more cold tolerant, so you start those early so you can put them out early. Perennial and biennial flowers, generally you want to start early. That's that's so many. Your daisies, the blanket flowers, all of those types of things. The sooner you get them going, the sooner you're going to get blossoms. I talked a little bit earlier about artichokes, starting them really early and then setting them outside after they start growing to make them think, but just wait till it's mildly winter, like in April, before you put them out. It takes about 3 or 4 weeks before most of these things will start to grow. March, you can still, in March, I just put some leeks in last week. That came late. It was a seed order that didn't get shipped until it's trouble. There's a hard time getting seeds right now. Some things are delayed. So there were some I didn't get. I'm not worried about it. Early March is still enough time. Celery, celeriac, parsley, hot peppers, I generally do early March, but again, these are kind of fluid. If you miss the cutoff, don't despair. Just get them in and start growing them. You might get them a little later. They might produce a little later, but it might just be a week, and that's just a matter of a week or two. So don't stress out if you think you've missed some deadline. And a lot of celosia, snapdragon, salvia, marigolds, nicotiana, alyssum, you can plant early March. Mid-March, put in your cosmos, cleome, marigold, zinnias, only because these grow fairly fast. And if you start them too soon, you're going to have giants before you can put them outside. So, you don't want to start them too soon. Sweet peppers, mid-March, eggplants, cabbage, broccoli, kale, collards, mid-March. The cabbage, broccoli, kale, collards, those all you start now so that you can put them out in April early because they love cool weather. And then late March, you can plant your tomatoes, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, basil, and calendula. The reason you wait a little bit for cauliflower and Brussels sprouts is they don't like to be put out quite as early as, say, cabbage and broccoli and kale. So if they get too, especially cauliflower, if it gets too cold, if it really dips, it might affect their ability to form a head. Brussels sprouts, you don't want to put out too early because you want them to start forming their sprouts later in the season, closer to frost, because frost actually improves the flavor of Brussels sprouts. And so you just don't want to start them super early because then you'll have your sprouts in August when it's the hottest month of the year. Basil grows pretty fast, like tomatoes, so you don't want to start that too early. And calendula, you can start in late March. It's a real fast germinator. It can be put out earlier at the same time you put out your cabbage and things like that. So you can start that sometime in March because it grows fast. You don't want to keep it indoors for too long. It can also be direct seeded outside too. And then greens, like I said, so I can get them extra early. I like to do all the green, a flush of greens in late March, and they're going to be out by the middle of April. They grow really fast. You don't keep them inside for very long. Middle to late April, you want to do direct sow peas, fava beans, lettuce, spinach, kale, mustard, arugula, and all the things we talk about, all your root crops. Radishes, come in really fast. So those, and they're pretty cold hardy. So you can have radishes in like 3 weeks after you plant them. They're super fast. Turnips, carrots, beets, bunching onions, you can direct sow outside. Cilantro does best directly sown outside. Some people do start it inside, but it does like cool weather. Sweet peas, larkspurs, calendula. So those are all things you can direct sow. And then at the same time, you can transplant outdoors all of your cole crops, which are cabbage, broccoli, kale, collards. You can transplant out your onions and leeks, all your greens like and celery and celeriac is surprisingly, I see a lot of seed packets say plant that after danger of frost, but I have had no problem with celery surviving, cool temperatures. If you're worried about it, you can cover them. And even though you're not starting these from seeds, it's also the time you want to plant your seed potatoes. Seed potatoes meaning large potatoes that have been cut up so that each section has an eye. But that's timing wise, that's when you do your potatoes as well. In May, you want to start, as we mentioned, if you must start those things early, you want to start them probably a week or two into May. The cucumber, squash, melons, beans, corns, okra. Corn is, I've seen some people have real good luck transplanting it. It's kind of the why bother, because you generally plant quite a bit of it, and that's a lot of starts to create. Sunflowers generally come super fast from direct sowing. Same for morning glories, moonflowers, and nasturtiums. Some of the, like morning glories, moonflowers, nasturtiums, generally do better if you soak them the night, for at least 24 hours before you plant them out. Sunflowers, you can do that too. It's just almost any plant can be soaked, for a few hours prior to planting. It might speed it up a little bit. Continue your succession plantings of early crops. You can keep planting carrots, beets. You can plant them every week if you want. Just a small, what you think you're going to use on a weekly basis. It's really hard to organize that and keep it all straight. So I usually aspire to doing that, and it falls somewhere in between total losing it and doing pretty well at it. But you can plant carrots and beets well into the end of July, and still have them be harvestable, and they can go well into the fall. So all of these things that's mentioned here are all things that like cool weather. So if you can keep growing them, and even the ones you plant really late in the year. I got another slide about that, but you can keep going on them until peas. That's about the end of when you can plant those. A lot of these things, once the really hot weather hits, it really stresses them out. Mid-May is when you want to direct sow seeds of the plant. If you didn't start them indoors, you can direct sow all of your standard garden flowers like cosmos and zinnia, cleome, calendula, marigold, sunflowers. They can all be direct sown. Transplant your cauliflower and your Brussels sprouts. Petunias. Petunias like cool weather, but they don't like cold weather. So, usually by the middle of May, you're pretty safe with those. Snapdragons, Alyssum, Nicotiana. Because we have really late frost sometimes, just keep an eye on the long-term forecast. But late May, usually, like I said, from the 21st on, as long as they're not forecasting a dip in temperatures, you can start all your warm weather crops right in the ground. And they like to be planted right in the ground. They prefer it. And that's all your corn, all your beans and cowpeas, cucumber, squash, melons, okra, sunflowers. And then again, those flowers I mentioned earlier, they can still be, you can still direct sow those. And that's when you transplant your real warm weather crops, your tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, basils. basil grows fast, but it doesn't like cold. So you want to wait to put that out. And your really cold hating flowers like celosia, begonias, and coleus that you start in the door. That's also when you can plant your sweet potatoes from starts. You can buy sweet potato starts or make your own. But you do not want to rush getting those outdoors. They hate cool weather with a white hot passion. So you want to make sure that the soil is super nice and warm and there's absolutely no chance of frost before you put those in. Actually, any of the things in the transplant list. You just don't want to trust the weather or trust them to make it through a really cold night. The last slide about when to start seeds is July. And a lot of people are thinking, well, I'm not starting. What do I start in July? Well, early July, if you're going to plant a fall garden, you have to think about starting your broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Chinese cabbage, things like that they don't like. They won't germinate well in hot weather, but you want to get them going in early July so that you can plant them out. Once they've germinated, they grow okay usually. Germination is one of the tough things. But then these will be coming into their own in September and early October when they love the cool weather. And if you've, and especially with the next one with the direct sowing of beets and carrots and turnips and radishes, and those things are so different because when they're grown and maturing during the cool months, they're much sweeter and happier because they're maturing during the cool weather. It's almost like eating, especially with turnips and radishes and the daikons, they are so much better grown in the fall than in the spring. But you have to think ahead. And then later in July, you want to direct sow your pak choi, lettuce, kale, chard, spinach, mustard, arugula, broccoli, rabe. All should be full sized by cold weather. Now, most of these plants that we're listing here can take a frost, they can take the cold weather, but they won't be growing and substantially after we start getting frosts. So you need to that's why you have to start them in July, is you need to get them to a producing stage by the time we start getting frost. Once they're producing, they can usually stand the frost quite happily. They're just not going to keep growing. I just want to do a plug for the Lyon Township Public Library Seed Library. Seeds are free. You just fill out a registration form one time. You'll be put on an email list where you'll get periodic reminders. Just when you take seeds, you help yourself. We try to ask people to keep it to one packet of each variety. So, because we're trying to share the wealth, have as many people get as many seeds as possible. Just mark how many packets you got on the clipboard with your initials. We no longer have you write your name on the clipboard for privacy reasons, but so you just put we're basically trying to keep statistics. We're not trying to track you down and see what you did with the seeds. We just want to know how many are going out the door. Seed saving is a whole nother program that we're going to do a little later on, but please attempt to save seeds and return them back to the seed library. That's how we keep the seed library self-sustaining. There's also, alongside the seed library there's a lot of handouts there that you can take. Everything from seed viability charts to what to start when, similar to what we just saw. Lots of other informational things. And we also are involved in One Seed, One State, which is an initiative by the Michigan Seed Library Network. This year we're doing Provider Bean. So it's kind of like where one state reads a book. It's the same thing for seeds. We're trying to get everybody to grow this seed and experience it. It's a super easy seed to grow. It's direct sown, so you don't have to start it indoors. the little poster there says 2020 inaugural seed. Those were made just before COVID hit. So we are, you know, it's actually the 2021. It's our first year doing this, but so come in and get your provider seeds and grow along with the rest of us. Here's some sources for information. A Seed Savers Exchange probably has hands down the best collection of seed saving and seed starting and gardening information. Mother Earth News also has a lot of real awesome, and there's tons more out there. I mean, YouTube videos galore. There's lots of ways to get information now. I try to steer people toward these the more standard sources, because a lot of people can be putting out, there's a lot of false information out there. And so kind of see where your sources is that you're learning this from. Keep in mind too that there's, you know, we were talking a lot today about what to do in Michigan. It's different if you're in Washington or Washington, D.C. or Florida or Texas. And a lot of times seed packets they don't print as different seed packet for every geographic area. So a lot of times seed packets will be kind of vague. So that's why I try to put as much Michigan-centric information on our Lyon Township library page. There's sources for seeds, a lot of seed catalogs. There's copies of the program handouts that we have and links to gardening. So please visit the Lyon Township page and find the LTPL Grows is the name of our initiative. And that's where all of our gardening information is. And just the last thing I want to say is don't be afraid to experiment. Mistakes is how you learn. And I mean, that's what we tell our kids. It's true for us too. You remember something a lot better when you've made a horrible mistake, but you're going to have more successes and failures. Your garden will humble you because you can't control everything. You can't control the weather. You can't control a lot of things about gardening. You can't control animals and bugs. So, you know, things are going to happen, but just try to be optimistic. And one thing I always say is every year you get a chance to do it all over again and try again. So, yeah, well, I appreciate all the kind remarks you're making on the, and not a choice. I like Bradley's. It isn't a choice. I started gardening when I was a child with my father and mother. So it's sort of, I can't not garden.
All right, so there's our results.
Okay.
We've got a couple of veteran gardeners, quite a few people who have been doing it a while, and only one person who says they've just only gotten their hands dirty recently. So.
And if you go on the Lyon Township website, you're going to find my email address in that area, and I'm happy. A lot of people email me with questions or call me with questions. I prefer email because I'm not always at the library, but I'm always checking my email, no matter if it's my day off or not. So you know, I'm always happy to answer questions. All righty. It sounds like
thanks everyone so much. I'm gonna
yeah, thank you.